I think it had.
Sorry?
It had to the video. It's like a commercial.
Sponsored by
Okay. So, Parshas Va'era this week. So this week's Parsha opens up. We really talked a lot about this week's Parsha last week. Va'era Hashem, Va'era Avram. Hashem is responding to Moshe. Last week's Parsha ends up with Moshe saying, complaining effectively to Hashem, saying, why are you making it so bad for the Jewish people in Egypt? And Hashem responds and says, I appear to Avram Yitzchak Yaakov, and he gives him this whole answer that we talked about. Then Hashem tells Moshe, go back to Parai and tell Parai, let my people go. And Hashem goes and tells Parai that, and Parai says, ha ha, funny joke. How about I make things harder instead? And then the work ramps up and things are getting harder and harder. And then we have the beginning of the 10 plagues, the first majority of the 10 plagues. Now, to zoom out for a minute and get some context here, there's an obligation, a scriptural obligation, to remember. It says, Laban Tizkor es Yom Tzeischa Meretz Mitzrayim Kol Yomei Chayecha. You must recall the exodus from Egypt all the days of your life. There are 6 things that we say at the end of davening every day. There's Sheish Zechiros, that every day we make an effort to recall them as we are about to go about our day and start our day. And one of those things that we remember that we recall every day, and the first one of them is this, to remember the Exodus from Egypt. Now there are a couple of layers to this. Number one is, why is it so important to remember the Exodus from Egypt? It looks like the clock is fixed this week. Yeah, is it accurate? Yeah, okay. Mm-hmm. The Exodus from Egypt. Number one is, well, if Hashem hadn't taken us out of Egypt, we'd still be there. And us leaving Egypt was the beginning of our journey as a people. That's when we formally became the Jewish people. So obviously this is a very fundamental, seminal event in our history as a people. But it also carries an additional message, and that is, and this is in a sense the most fundamental of all messages, or the most fundamental of all priorities or things that we have to remain cognizant of on an ongoing basis. And this is, let's say, what we have to remember every day is Yetzias Mitzrayim. Now, Yetzias means the exodus from, or the exodus of. Exodus meaning going out from, that's literally what it means, going out from. Now, Mitzrayim, the word Mitzrayim means Egypt. That's the literal meaning, Pshat. But anyone who's looked in a Sefer Torah, in a Torah scroll, knows that there are no vowels in a Torah scroll. The vowels are added in Chumashim, and there are vowels in Hebrew, but they're not included in the original text, which means that if you look in a Torah and you read this word Mitzrayim, it can equally be read as Mitzrayim, which means Egypt. Same exact word with a couple of changes, or change all the vowels, I guess. Meitzarim, same word, completely different meaning, right? Min ha-meitzar, we say in Tehillim in Psalms. People would say from the depths. It doesn't really mean the depths. It's an appropriate English, not quite translation, but rewriting of it. But min ha-meitzar means from the constraints. Meitzar means a constraint. What's a constraint? A constraint is a limitation, something that limits, a boundary. And Yetzias Mitzrayim, or Yetzias Meitzarim, means the exodus from, going out from our boundaries. The things that limit us. And this is really what we are here for. Every one of us exists in order to grow, in order to achieve, in order to make an impact. Now, it can seem like it's a kind of thing that, having a one-on-one conversation with someone, and sometimes people need encouragement and they need to be reminded, well, like the fact that this is easy for someone else doesn't mean that it's not a big deal for you to do it because it's harder for you. And it can sound like, oh yeah, convince them that they're doing a good job. But it actually is, that really is the way that it works. The way challenges are defined, or the difficulty of a challenge, one of the things, or the thing that's ultimately going to determine how difficult a challenge is a combination of the nature of the challenge and the nature of the individual who is being challenged by it. Right? If I would try to bench press 250 pounds, 500 pounds, whatever it is, and Mr. Olympia or the world's strongest man would try to bench press the same amount, on one hand, you could say, well, it's the same challenge, it's the same exact weight, it's the same bench, it's the same bar, same plates on the side, same exact thing. It was like, yeah, but it's not the same challenge because we're different people, and how challenging it is, the extent to which it's challenging for me to raise that bar, to lift that bar, is very different to the extent to which it's challenging for someone else who's incomparably stronger than me. Right? The difficulty level of a challenge is in very large part determined by the nature of the individual who is being challenged in a given instance. Right? Learning an extra 10 minutes a day of Torah for one person is just like, oh, whatever, big deal. For someone else, that might be a really, really big challenge. Maybe their life is busier, maybe they have more obligations, it's hard to fit the time in. Maybe that person really just doesn't enjoy learning Torah and finds it very difficult to focus attention on things that they don't enjoy. And for them to do it, maybe they have plenty of time, but it's really, really, really hard. And the other person is just like, just learn another 10 minutes, what's the big deal? And for the second person, it's like, well, I'm trying, but it's really hard. Right? Same exact, the objective event or the objective thing that is supposed to be done is not the determining factor in how difficult something is. The difficulty level is determined in at least equal part, or let's say, I don't know, equal, it doesn't matter whether it's 50, 40, 60 or whatever it is, but in a very, very substantial part by the nature of the person being challenged. Right? And we all have different things that are more challenging for us than they are for others. Things that are less challenging for us than they are for others. And obviously others doesn't mean anything because others is a bunch of individuals and everyone has their own different levels to in terms of the extent to which different things are challenging. Right? But we all have things that are holding us back. And we are here, the objective, the mission is not, to do a certain thing. The mission is to achieve, to grow, to make progress. Which means that if something is really difficult for me, much more than it is for an average person, and I improve 1% in that thing that's really difficult for me and it took a huge amount of effort, and that is a very substantial achievement for me. I achieved something in growing 1% in that area, where other people could improve 30% without batting an eyelid. Then I have achieved when I improved 1% in that area. I achieved. It was an achievement. Why? Because I went out of my Meitzarim, the things that constrain me, the things that limit me, whether it's my nature as a result of the way I was born, or whether it's my effective nature now because of a combination of my genes and my experiences and all of those things, and ultimately everything's a mixture of all of the above. But if my, let's say, genes plus experiences produce a situation in which there's a thing that happens to be particularly challenging for me, that is a constraint for me, that is a meitzar. And when I put in effort and go beyond that constraint, I am doing Yetzias Meitzarim, exodus from constraints. I'm breaking out of the boundaries that hold me back. All of us have constraints. All of us have Meitzarim. And there are sort of different categories of Meitzarim, of constraints, of things that hold us back. There's, a huge one, probably for most people, there are some people who take pleasure in being uncomfortable, but for most people, our comfort zone is a pretty big constraint. Right? There are things that we're comfortable doing and things that we're not comfortable doing and places we're comfortable going and the extent to which we're comfortable to push ourselves. And then there's a point where it's like, yeah, I don't know about that. Right? So comfort zone is a very big constraint. And a lot of times with things like comfort zone, it's just a matter of reminding ourselves, you know what, like, it's okay to be uncomfortable. The fact that something's uncomfortable, the fact that I don't want to do it, the fact that it's going to be a little bit unpleasant, is not a reason why I have to not do it. It's not a reason why I have to resist doing it or be afraid to do it. A lot of times it's just a matter of a reminder of, oh, right. That's where growth happens. That's where achievement happens. That's where progress happens. I'm allowed to do things that are uncomfortable. But if we forget to remind ourselves of that, just the fact that something's uncomfortable can be a very real constraint, a limiting factor, right? And then there are things that happen to be more than just outside our comfort zone, but particularly challenging for a given person. You know, one example that I think is just very effective to illustrate, it's something that a lot of people relate to, and probably most people, you know, have a challenge with this to some degree, at some level, and the spectrum of the extent of that and where it's at is massive, obviously, is very broad, is relationship with food, right? The Alter Rebbe uses the example throughout Tanya of food, of relationship with food, the challenge of food, iskaf your food again and again and again. Why? There's no such thing as someone who doesn't need to eat. We all need to eat. Hopefully we all have healthy taste buds. We all have some sort of taste in food and interest in food, which means it's a thing that we can't avoid. Right now, for some people, it's just like it's not such a big deal. They eat what they're going to eat, they move on, and that's it. A lot of people really have to stop and, you know, make intentional decisions about, am I going to eat this? How much of it am I going to eat? Am I going to eat that? How much of it am I going to eat? For some people, it's a little bit. For some people, a lot. And for some people, it's a massive struggle. And for the person who really, really struggles with this, with eating, for example, and then the person who's just like, whatever, it's just food, just eat it. Eat it, don't eat it, what's a big deal? Right? For the person who doesn't understand and relate to having challenges in a relationship with food, they're going to look at the person who really, really struggles with this and just be like, just don't eat it. It's not a big deal. Like, just don't put it in your mouth. What's going to happen? Right? Because they don't understand the challenge. And the person who really, really struggles with it is like, well, like, I'm spending my whole day and all of my mental and emotional energy on trying to, like, eat in a way that I know is better for my health. And it's really, really, really difficult for me for whatever reason. And the person who doesn't relate to it, it just looks at them and it's just like, well, what do you mean? Just don't put it in your mouth. Right? Because for one person, it's a challenge, and for one person, it's not. When both people, let's say, eat one less donut on Hanukkah, for one person, it's just like, oh, I didn't even notice. Or it's like, there are donuts, whatever, big deal. And for the second person who like really, really struggles with it, and they manage to eat 7 donuts on one day of Hanukkah instead of the 8 that they could have eaten or would have eaten, instead of the 10 that they ate yesterday, they go down by a couple. To the other person, they look at them and they're just like, I don't get it. But for this person, that's an achievement. They worked hard. They did achieve. They went out of their constraints. This is a constraint for them. And we all have our own versions of this. We all have our own versions of this in terms of what's emotionally difficult for us, and we have an emotional resistance to it. We all have our own versions of the things that are actually like empirically difficult for us to do. And it takes a lot of effort to actually do it, not necessarily emotionally, but actually in terms of the skill or the ability to do it. Right? We all have constraints. And we are here to go out of our constraints. We are here to grow. We are here to be moving forward, to make progress, to achieve. That's the objective. And for different people who are in different places in their lives, every one of us is in a different place with regard to different things. Right? If we would, list 20, 30 things that are important in life, physically, spiritually, in terms of Judaism, in terms of, emotionally, if we were right up a long list, every single one of us is going to have a different combination of where we are for different things. And the objective is not all of us need to be at this level in all things. The objective is every one of us should be working to go out of our constraints because we're here to achieve. Achievement is the objective. What defines achievement? I've achieved something. That means I've gone out of the things, the constraints that limit me. I've done that which was not easy. I've gone out of my comfort zone. I've done the thing that was difficult for me to do. And maybe the thing that's difficult for me to do is to put in the effort and try. And maybe I try really hard, and you know what? I didn't do the thing that I tried to do. But you know what? Yesterday I didn't even try. I couldn't even motivate myself to try, and today I tried. Right? The going out of the comfort zone isn't necessarily, and this is a really important thing to remember, isn't necessarily measured in something tangible. It doesn't mean that, you know, yesterday I ran a 5-minute mile and today I ran a 4.9-minute mile. It doesn't have to be necessarily something tangible. Right? It's not like it's one thing. We all have many things going on in our lives, many different constraints that we could focus on. It's probably a good idea to, you know, pick one at a time to really put our effort into. But, you know, a lot of times an achievement can just be, you know what? I really tried today. Like, I've been knowing that I should work on this and I should put in effort and I should try. And for a long time, I for whatever reason, I haven't been able to just even manage to get myself to try, or I just haven't bothered. And today I tried. And you know what? I didn't do any better than I did the other days in terms of actually doing or achieving. But I tried. And I've been trying to try. And so far, I haven't managed to try. And today I really did try. That is an achievement. Trying is something. If there's a constraint that makes it hard for someone to try, and they manage to try, that can be a very real achievement. They have broken out of a constraint that was holding them back. They did their Yitzias Meitzarim, they're going out of their constraints. And there are so many different variations and levels and stages and layers of constraints. But it's so important to remember and to have clarity in this, that ultimately we are here to grow, we are here to achieve, and that's why the first of the Sheish Zechiros every single day we finish davening, before we go out into the world and start our day and start doing what we've got to do, the first of the Sheish Zechiros is Laman Tizkor Es Yom Tzeschol Meretz Mitzrayim Kol Yimei Chayecha. Remember the exodus, the going out of your constraints every single day, because that's what you're here for. To grow, to achieve, to do that which you should be doing but is difficult for you. That's where the purpose ultimately lies. Well, that's a big part of it. It's just a bit of an oversimplification, but yes.
Right. That, from what I'm understanding, you're saying that each time you win the battle, you're experiencing it, yes, right?
Yes.
But in my head, I had it like each time like you win a war, like, you know what I mean? Because if you win a battle, maybe the next minute you're again in Egypt. Like, you can like win for 1 minute, and then at the next minute you're back again.
Right. Okay, very good question.
So you're really like
an important question. I'm glad you asked. I mean, technically you didn't ask a question, but I think I get what you
Yeah, like my question is like, are you really like going out of your...
Okay, so we could come at this from let's say the analogy of the battle and the war, right? Imagine, and this is, I'm creating a scenario that works to illustrate the point that I'm trying to illustrate, but we could imagine this could be a very realistic scenario. Imagine that there's a meeting, and when there's like, maybe, it's a military meeting, it's about a war, there's a big war somewhere, God forbid, and the generals who have decades of experience, assuming that they actually are the right people to be the generals, and they're having a meeting and they're coming up with a strategy, and they're like, okay, so tomorrow, what's the plan? What's the plan for this battle? And then you have some young person who's motivated and driven and starry-eyed, and they walk in and they just joined the army a week ago, and they're like, well, why are you just focusing on one battle? Forget the battle. We have a bigger army. Let's just win the war. And it's like, well, what do you mean just win the war? There's no such thing as just winning the war. You win the war by winning the battles. That's the way it works. Right? If you have a plate of food, right, the way that you eat the food is not by eating all the food on your plate. There's no such thing as eating the food on your plate. Eating the food on your plate is a project that's made up of a series of actions, which are take a bite, take another bite, take another bite, take another bite. And if you take sufficient number of bites and eat sufficient number of bites, you will finish the food on your plate. Right? You don't just eat the plate. It's not like a thing that you do. It's a project that you achieve by a series of things. Right? A war, by definition, is made up of a series of battles. Now, the difference between the conventional way that we think of a battles and a war and the way it is in our personal Yetzias Mitzrayim, in our purpose, the reason that we're here, is that, let's say if it's a war to protect some land, right? Someone's attacking and you want to protect the land, and there's a battle, one battle at a time to try to win the war, to try to get rid of the enemy, get them to go away, or to conquer land, or whatever it is. Right? There's an objective, and either you achieve the objective or you didn't. If you're having a war, if you're waging a war to conquer a piece of land, or you're in a war to protect your land and protect your people from someone who's attacking, if you manage to defeat the attackers and get them to leave, you won the war. If you win 100 battles in a row, but then in the 101st battle, they just come and overpower and kick everyone out and take the land. It's like, it's very nice that we won 100 battles in a row, but they won the war. And it's all, effectively, it's nice that we won 100 battles, but it doesn't matter. It's worth nothing because we lost the war. Right? When it comes to us, because the objective here is the Yetzias Mitzrayim, if I went out of my Mitzrayim today, if you managed to step outside or step beyond the constraints that are holding you back, you won. That's the battle. It's not actually a war, right? To look at it as like it's a war made up of a bunch of battles is the wrong way to look at it. And it's a very common and natural way to look at it. It's like, I tried to, for so long I've been doing really well, and then I messed up and now the whole thing is like, no, it's not true. That's not the way it works. Because if the objective, if the value lies in going out of your constraints, then if you went out of your constraints 100 days in a row, you did what you were supposed to do. On the 101st day, you didn't. Okay. Now, if we look at it the way that it's natural to look at it, and therefore that means I messed up and the whole thing's worth nothing, that's completely, it's a misunderstanding of the way it works, and this is really the reason that it's different is because the value is in the fact that we achieved. If you achieved 100 times, you achieved 100 times. So that 101st time you didn't achieve, you messed up, and it makes it seem like you didn't achieve. See, here's the difference, right? In a battle that's part of a war, the value in the battle lies in the fact that it contributes towards winning the war. Right? If a battle contributes towards winning the war, it's valuable. If it doesn't, it's not. Which means that if you win 100 battles in a row, but on the 101st battle, it's a catastrophe and you lose the whole thing, all of those battles are worthless. Right? If we look at it as, I need to break out of all my limitations, and every day I'm chipping away at that, then if I chip away 100 days in a row and on day 101 I mess it up and I feel like I'm back where I started, the whole thing is worthless. But it's not I need to break free of all my limitations and I'm chipping away towards that. It's I need to step out of my limitations. Stepped out of my limitations right now, boom, done, closed. That has a bow on it and it's on the shelf. I broke out of my limitations. Every time we do that, it is objectively valuable in and of itself, regardless of where it leads to. Now, because we're human and the way that we perceive things, it can be helpful and motivating to look at the big picture and see the progress that we've made, which can help for a lot of people to drive them forward more. And there is truth in that. But the reason that the effort you put in every day for the last 30 days or the last 2 days or just today is valuable is not because it's bringing you towards your objective. That's the way we see it. The way that Hashem sees it is very simple. You put in effort, you broke out of your constraints, you did Yetzias Mitzrayim, period, end of story. And if a person does that one time and they never do it again, that one thing that they did that one time, it continues to exist forever. It's eternal. Right? So if And the nature of reality, the nature of, it's not even the nature of it's not human nature. Maybe it is in part, but it really, I think it's a more of a fundamental thing, and it's not like it's a law of thermodynamics or anything, but it's a law of like the way that things work ultimately in the universe universally is there are ups and there's downs, and there are steps forward and steps back. Right? That's the way Hashem, for whatever reason, Hashem designed the world in that way, and He certainly designed people in that way. And the fact that we slide back has nothing to do with what we've done up until now. If you're fighting a war to protect territory or to conquer territory, yes, that is the way it works. Either you won or you lost, and everything up until then means nothing. It doesn't mean nothing, and people worked hard and blah, 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 but if you lost, you lost. Right? But that's not the way this is. Every time we do Yetzias Mitzrayim, every time we break free of a constraint, we have broken free of a constraint, and it's done. That event happened, and it's permanent and eternal, and it will always be. That event will continue to exist forever. That will be something that we did, and nothing can ever take that away. Right? And it's the fact that over time those accumulate and they pile up if we keep working at it and keep chipping away, it can be helpful and motivating, but it's not truly the primary benefit in that probably is, I mean, it's a few things because it does bring the world closer to where we're supposed to get it, but in terms of our personal mission and our personal objective, I mean, there are components and layers to that too, that's the truth. But as far as the idea of Yetzias Mitzrayim is concerned, it's every single event. It's not about chipping away towards a goal. It's about chipping away, period. You chipped away, done. Finished. Nothing can take that away. Can you pile things up on top of that? Yes. But the value in doing this is not that it brings you towards something else. It's the fact that you did it. You stepped out of your comfort zone, you fulfilled this mitzvah, period. It's done. Right? If a person lights Shabbos candles one week and they never light Shabbos candles again, does that mean it was useless? They lit Shabbos candles? Of course not. They did a mitzvah 100%, and that mitzvah is eternal. And the impact and the effect of that mitzvah will exist for eternity. Same thing, every time someone steps beyond their constraints, it happened and they did it. It's not a means to an end. It's also a means to an end, but that's secondary. The primary thing is, it's something that someone did. And the slipping backwards, it's like, you know what? Welcome to being human. Welcome to existing in the universe. Right? Then get used to it, because it's going to happen again. Sorry to disappoint you. And doesn't mean anything. Obviously, it does not mean anything, but it has no impact on the things you've done up until then. You did those things, they're done. They're on the shelf, they're in the book, and they're eternal, and nothing is ever going to take that away. Nothing's going to undo it. Because it's not about the war. Every battle is its own battle. Win or lose, it's done, and that's on to the next one. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
Okay, so now, this is why Yetzias Mitzrayim and the Exodus from Egypt, or an additional layer to why this is so important and so fundamental. And the Torah tells us, right, in this week's parsha, the Torah tells us a sequence of events that led up to us leaving Egypt. Right, there are 10 plagues. Which means that each of these plagues, each of the 10 plagues is a factor that contributed towards the Jews being able to go from being in Egypt to being outside of Egypt. Which means that if we look at the nature of these plagues, it should give us some insight into things that we can do to help us step beyond our constraints, to step beyond our comfort zone, to be able to push ourselves to do things that are difficult, that are challenging, whether it's emotionally challenging or empirically challenging, physically, whatever it is. And the two that we're going to focus on are the first two. And we're going to focus on these two plagues and what they represent, and not just the plagues, but the order of the plagues, which is extremely important. All right, if you would take the best blog post ever written, the best essay ever written, the best novel ever written, the best song ever played, right? If you would take the greatest musical composition ever, and you would just take the different verses, the different stanzas, and reorder them, it's not going to be the greatest piece of music ever anymore, is it? If you take a blog post and every single paragraph is like amazing, and you could like do a study in each of the paragraphs individually to learn how to write an amazing paragraph, and each one has its own message and its own, you could see what went into designing each paragraph, and then you like, whoa, these paragraphs are every one of these paragraphs is so amazing, and you just reorder the paragraphs, it's not going to be the same blog post, not going to be the same article, right? The order makes a difference. And a big part of putting together a really good piece of writing sometimes is figuring out the order. And a lot of times, you write something and you've got all the stuff down, and then you'll be like, maybe let's move this around, maybe that belongs earlier, and then that, and sometimes minor adjustments to the sequence can make a huge difference in the value and the impact. So the order it's not just what are the plagues. The order of the plagues is going to be very, very important here also. What's plague number one, right? Step number one is, sometimes, once you get to step number 10, at that point, step number one seems so trivial and like, oh, I thought I was actually doing something of impact then, like this is where it's at. It's like, yeah, but you could not have gotten here without that. Even if once you get, at the end of the day, it doesn't seem like step number one actually really was important at all, but if you couldn't have gotten to step number 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10 without step number one, then it's the most important, because that makes or breaks whether you get anywhere at all.
None.
Bingo. Plague number one was blood. What does blood mean? Blood is a word. The first plague was that all the water in Egypt, primarily, the greatest emphasis being the water of the Nile River, turned into blood. The differences between water and blood, I mean, lots of differences.
Water is life, blood is death.
No.
I mean, blood on the floor might be death, but blood is life, right? The reason, why is it that water gives life? Because blood is mostly water and blood is life, right? And for example, I mean, this is like a bit of a random tangent, but it's not a tangent, but it's a piece of trivia, but a person who loses, let's say if someone's losing a lot of blood and it's dangerous, this might seem like it doesn't make any sense, but it can make a lot of sense. Sometimes just drinking tons of water can absolutely save someone's life. Why? Because, in extreme circumstances, because if a person loses half the blood in their body, let's say, God forbid, or more, or less, whatever, enough that it's a problem, the issue isn't necessarily there isn't enough blood to distribute oxygen, right? A lot of times the biggest problem that happens first is that the blood pressure goes down. If there's no blood pressure, the blood's not going to leak out of the capillaries into the tissues and bring oxygen to where it needs to be delivered. Right? That's why blood pressure is so important. And so even if a person lost half of their blood and they lost half of their blood cells and all of that, sometimes, and God forbid anyone should ever need this, but if a person feels like they've lost a lot of blood and they're waiting for the ambulance to come or whatever it is, Rahman al-Islam, drinking a lot of water, just drinking water, that water gets absorbed into the bloodstream. The blood's much more diluted, but it can at least replace the blood pressure, so the blood's getting out and doing something. That can be life-saving. Right, so blood is primarily made up of water. The reason that water is so valuable to drink, the person's drinking water then, it's saving their life. Why? Because the water is going in to replenish the blood that's missing. Right, so blood is life. I hope this isn't too much, right? Blood is warmth. When people are passionate, excited, what happens? Their skin can get flushed, their face gets flushed. Why? What is it? What's happening when a person's what does it mean? What's happening when a person's skin gets flushed is that the blood vessels close to their skin are dilating, and there's literally more blood close to the skin, and you see the red, you see the color in the skin. Blood is the source of life. Blood is life. Right? If you see two people and one person, or the same person, and you like encounter them in one moment and their face is very pale, and another moment their face is like really red, you'll be able to feel the difference. You put the back of your fingers against the face, you'll feel a difference between a cold cheek and a very warm cheek. Like blood is warmth, it's life, it's passion, it's movement, it's excitement. Sorry?
It's also history, like blood carries all your genetic information through all the generations.
Well, every cell in your body does.
But
Yeah. But here specifically, the thing that we're focusing on is the aliveness, the passion, the movement, the warmth, the heat. And this is number one. Right? What was the Nile? The Nile was water.
thank God.
It was cold. It was their god. And what was it? It was cold. It was just water. How do you put out a fire? Right? Fire is very good as a servant. It's terrible as a master. How do you put out fire? With water. Fire is heat. Fire is movement, right? Which resembles blood, which is warm, not because they're red, but it's warm. It represents passion and excitement and being dynamic, being alive, lively. And for the water that's on the ground, this is the source of life for Egypt, the source of life for constraints. What's the source of life and energy for constraints? It's this coldness. It's being cold. Don't get so excited. Oh, you saw a miracle, that's a miracle? Oh, relax, it's not a miracle. Or it's a miracle, you get so excited, miracles happen all the time. Always something, there's always a way that part of us, that the Yetzer Hara comes and cools us off, right? Amalek, same thing. What happened with Amalek? That's another one of the Sheish Zechiros actually, is Amalek, remembering Amalek, Asher Karcha Baderech. The actual literal translation of that, what that means, the pshat is, Karcha Baderech means they encountered you. Mikra means an encounter. But Kar means cold. They cooled you off along the way. Right? Being the Debbie Downer when someone's excited about something and passionate, and someone comes in and they're just like a killjoy and just like crash the excitement. Right? When you crash someone's excitement about something, you haven't just crashed their excitement, you've probably crashed their performance and their involvement. Because excitement motivates performance. Excitement is passion. Excitement are the greatest source of, or one of the greatest sources of motivation to move, to do things, to make changes, to make a difference, to get things done, to make things happen. And the Nile River, like Amalek, is this coldness. It's this coldness that runs through the center of Egypt, that runs through the Mitzrayim, the constraints that hold us back. I was like, I have a purpose, I have a mission, okay, and whatever, I'm trying, I'm doing what I can. Imagine the difference, now you could have two people, or same person on different days. A person says, I have a mission, I'm here for a reason, whatever, And then you have someone else who's like, I have a purpose, I have a mission, there's something I can achieve, I can make a difference.
Yeah.
Do you think that the difference between those two people is just or excited? Or do you think it's likely that realistically there's going to be a substantial difference in their performance, in what they do, in what they achieve? Of course there's going to be a difference. Coldness, being cold, being the Nile River, that cold water that is the lifeblood, cold water is the lifeblood, is the source of life for Mitzrayim. This was the source of life in Egypt. It's the source of life of constraints and limitations. Is, being too cool for school. And it's like, there's a specific example that's coming to mind, but sometimes you'll see it could be kids, it could be adults, maybe it's, you see it more commonly and more obviously with kids, that like they're, you know, really trying really hard not to be too excited because they're too proud to be excited, for example, and they're just like, oh, I'm not going to be excited, I'm not going to be excited, and they try to hide it, and you can tell they're like really holding back that smile. Because they don't want to seem excited about something, that I'm going to be cool, I'm going to be cold, I don't want to be excited. That is the Nile River, that is this water, that is the source of limitations. It's like I'm too proud to get excited about something, ultimately is going to translate into I'm too proud to make a huge difference. Right? A lot of the things that, you know, have been life-changing, let's say even technologically over the last 20 years, for better and for worse, a lot of those are the result of someone who was just like, you know what? I don't care. I don't care if people think I'm an outlier. I don't care if they think I'm a geek. I don't care if they think I'm too excited about this to, you know, to be cool or whatever it is. I'm excited about this. I'm passionate about it. I'm going to go all the way. And they change the face of the human experience forever.
Even the word cool, which is like to be cool, it means cold, right? Like cool.
Yes. Yeah. Right, and what's part of being cool? It's like, you know, get too excited about everything. Like, it's like, by definition, that is going to hold a person back. If you want to, and you know what? You know, going back to how we opened up this whole thing, talking about the nature of Mitzrayim, of constraints, of challenges, if it's true, and it is, that a huge part of how difficult a challenge is or how limiting a constraint is our nature and the way we perceive it and the way we experience it, then our disposition is going to be a huge factor in how likely we are and how much of a chance we have to actually succeed. If we are passionate, we are excited, we are driven, most times for most of the things that are most challenging, that's going to be the thing that makes it or breaks it. And so plague number one, the first step is take that cold water that is the source of life, of Mitzrayim, of your constraints, and don't be too cool to allow yourself to be excited. Take that water, turn it into blood, turn it into life. Let it get heated up and excited and passionate and alive and driven and motivated. And when that water turns into blood, that is the first thing that is going to determine whether or not you're on the path to leaving your constraints, to going out of Mitzrayim, to going out of your Mitzrayim. Get passionate about why you're here. Get passionate about the purpose of existence. Get passionate about who we are deep down. Get passionate about what we're a part of. You know what happens when you get passionate and excited about things? Maybe it is a little bit less cool, but you know what? Cool is the enemy of extreme achievement. And passion is the driver of achievement. Passion, inspiration, caring, being involved is the primary thing that's going to motivate and actually drive the exodus from Mitzrayim, going out of your constraints, going out of your limitations. If you're passionate and excited about the purpose of breaking out of these things, then you know what? You might actually do it. So that's number one. Number two, what was the second plague? The second plague was frogs. Now, frogs are the opposite. Frogs are slimy and wet, and they're in the water. And they represent basically the opposite of fire. Right? And it actually says that the frogs in Egypt, they were just everywhere and there were tons of them, and they actually jumped into the ovens to put out the ovens so that the Egyptians couldn't cook and they didn't have heat. Right? Because if frogs are this wet and slimy and they represent wetness and cold of water, they're the opposite of fire. Well, it's like, well, we just said that we want the opposite of blood, which is heat, warmth, passion. If we said that number one is the warmth and passion, And then step number 2 is the opposite of that. It's like what you want to get excited and then just cool it off and then crash your excitement and passion that you just worked to develop. So it's no. Which water turned into blood? The water of Egypt, that coldness towards purpose, that coldness towards things having meaning, that coldness towards spirituality, that coldness towards you actually being here for a reason and being able to make a difference and mattering. Being cold to that, it's like, yeah, whatever, sounds nice. That is the Nile River. That's the cold water of Egypt. That's the cold water of limitations, of constraints that hold us back. Get rid of that. Turn that into blood and excitement and passion. The frogs jumped into the ovens of the Egyptians where they were cooking food, the food of Mitzrayim, the food, the passion, the heat, the fire of the limitations. The passion, the heat, the fire, that holds us back. Right? It's not necessarily universally a good thing to be as passionate as possible about everything. There are some things in life that would be a lot better off being a lot less involved in and passionate and excited about. And when it comes to those things, yeah, break out the frogs. Try to, get that excitement under control, grow up a little, adult, be a bit more mature, don't get so excited and carry away about all these things. When it's the oven of Egypt, when it's the warmth and the heat of Egypt, of the Mitzrayim, of the constraints, if there's something that we're excited about and passionate about and involved in, and it's a constraint, it's holding us back from being everything that we could be, from being the person that we want to be and making the mark on the world that we want to make, yeah, try to turn that down. Try to be a little bit less excited and passionate about it. But the order here is very important. Which one came first? First came blood, then came the frogs. Right? And this is something that I think translates very well, probably for most people, to nutrition. Right? If someone, let's say, someone's like, oh, for whatever reason, I'm not feeling so good. I know that if I cut out all this junk, I'll just feel completely different and I'll feel better and my head will be clearer and all these things, I'll be healthier, or maybe I want to lose some excess body fat or whatever it is. I want to be eating less junk food. I think that probably 99 times out of 100, you will end up eating less junk food if instead of trying to eat less junk food, you make a plan and you say, okay, what things should I be putting in my body every day? How much protein should I be putting in my body every day? How much healthy fat should I be putting in? How many of different kinds of carbohydrates should I be putting in? What are the best sources of that? What are healthy, natural, whole foods that I can get that from? In case I should be eating this amount of this food and this amount of this food and this amount of this food and this much salmon and this many eggs or whatever it is. And I'm going to try to get in this amount of each of these foods every week and then break it down to this amount of foods every day. You know what? If you wake up in the morning and you say, okay, so breakfast is this, let me eat my breakfast, let me eat my lunch, let me eat the foods I'm supposed to eat, you know what? You're probably going to end up eating a lot less junk food without even thinking about junk food. Now, even if the objective is eat less junk food, that doesn't mean that the approach to eating less junk food should be eat less junk food. Most people are going to have a much harder time not eating junk food by trying to not eating junk food than by putting the focus and attention on what should I be doing? What's the positive thing that I can do? And most times, that's going to be the biggest lever that's going to have the greatest impact on actually making that difference. And yes, it's valuable and worthwhile and it's important, and it is step number 2 to try to take the edge off our excitement for the things that we shouldn't be so excited about. But that's step number 2. Start with step number 1. You're going to get a much greater impact on your life, on who you are, on how you feel, on the achievements that you make, on the impact that you make, on the progress that you make, on the breaking out of your constraints, if you start by focusing on getting better informed and more focused on why am I here? Who am I? What am I? What is this? Why is it all here? How does it all fit together? It's like, you know what? There's a purpose. The universe exists for a reason. And you have a unique contribution to make towards that if all other 8 billion people in the world combined couldn't make without you, and the evidence is if they could, you wouldn't be here. Get excited about that. I can make a difference. I have the infinity of the Creator inside of me. And there's something that infinity of the Creator combined with my personality and my talents and my gifts and my weaknesses and my struggles, and all of those things come together to be able to make a unique mark on the world that everyone else since the history of creation combined has not been able to make. Think about that. Get excited. Feel motivated. Feel driven. Take that water and turn it into blood. Take that coldness and make it warm. Allow our cheeks to get rosy. Feel excited. Get passionate. That's step number 1. And step number 2 is, yes, try to take the edge off the excitement for the negative things. But step number 1 comes first. And you know what? The person who's focusing on eating the things they should be eating and their meal prepping maybe, and eating the right breakfast and the right lunch and all the right meals and the right snacks, if that's what they should be doing, and that's another whole conversation. But the person who's focusing on eating what they should be eating, let's say that gets them 90% of the way there maybe, and 90% is an arbitrary number I made up, but it might be something like that. It's like, yes, step number 2 to get from 90% to 98% is to say, you know what? Now I'm going to try to cut out those bits of junk food that I'm still eating. But they're already eating 90% less junk food because they're focusing on what they should be eating. Right? The person who's getting passionate and excited about the right things, about why we're here and all of these things, naturally, if we're working on that consistently, the passion and excitement for those other things, it's going to just recede into the background a lot by itself. It's going to get weaker over time by itself. And you know what? When we're up to that, let's attack that. That's step number 2. But step number 1 is appreciate why we're here, appreciate who we are, appreciate that it's all part of the infinity, the divine infinity of the Creator, and every one of us matters and makes a difference. And don't be too cool to let yourself get excited about it. Allow yourself to be the dork who gets excited about the fact that you matter and you make a difference. And you don't have to be a dork, but you also don't be too cool for school, because that's the Nile River. And that's the lesson here is, every one of us is here to break free of the constraints that are limiting us. And step number 1 to do that is to just appreciate that it all means something and you have infinity inside of you and it matters. Get excited about it. Hannah, did you have a question first? Okay.
How did you say that like Svardea do like accomplish that? Because I thought that they just invested the land. I mean, like I know they jumped in the ovens, but how does that mean that we hone in our excitement? Like how does that?
Well, what it represents is taking this cold, wet sliminess of the frogs and just filling Egypt with it. Right, so it's taking, and what that does is it's making whatever warmth and comfort and excitement there was in Egypt just got completely smothered by these wet, slimy, cold frogs. Right, so that's taking that warmth and excitement, not necessarily the ovens are the extreme illustration of it, but it's this idea of taking the cold wetness, that cold dampness, like what Amalek did, which is karcha, they cooled you off, that's the frogs. It's cooling off. Let's cool ourselves off about those other things. And you know what? You know, a person might say, that's great, how do I do that? Sometimes, just a little reminder or just a little reframing can go a long way. We get caught up in something, and sometimes just a reminder and say, hang on a second, do I really want to get carried away with this? Like maybe naturally I just have a tendency to get caught up in something. And sometimes it can be as tactical and as tangible as like setting a reminder on a phone to just stop and check in with myself. If I know that at a certain time of day I tend to get carried away with a certain thing, literally set a reminder on your phone that doesn't have to say don't do this or remember. It might just say, you know, is this what you want, ? Or something. Just ask yourself, just check in and remind ourselves, do I want to get carried away? Because being carried away and being excited doesn't necessarily always have to be, I'm trying not to, but I can't help it. It might just be, I get caught up, and just reminding myself can make all the difference.
And why is Mitzrayim warm in this, like, analogy?
Well, it has both. Mitzrayim, there's the Nile and the coldness and the warmth. Right? So there is coldness in the opposition to us. Within the constraints, there's a coldness in the constraints that holds us back, a coldness towards the true purpose and meaning, and there is also a warmth towards things that are holding us back. Right? So there is an excitement. We all have things that we tend to get excited about and interested in and caught up in that are holding us back. And we all have things that we're being held back by the fact that we're a little bit too cool about them. Right? So every one of us has both of these. It's not that Mitzrayim is one or the other. It's all of us have, everybody's set of constraints is going to include some of both. And step number 1 is work on the building up, turning the water into blood. And then step number 2 is work on recruiting the frogs.
In a way, it's like warm Swedishkeit and coldness to the world.
Pretty much, yes.
And the other 8.
Sorry? Those are the 2 that the Rebbe focuses on in the Sikha.
Don't let people tell you you're a crazy Baal Tshuva.
Hello. B'makom she'Baal Tshuva endim, in the place that a Baal Tshuva stands, a tzaddik can't get there. And the reason is, basically, because they're crazy. Right? That's the whole point. The point is that distance drives them. The Baal Tshuva, because of the distance, is driven to an extent that the tzaddik is naturally never going to be driven. And in doing so,